Hi guys, my name is Zach Bush, and I'm going to be showing you how to use layers within Photoshop if you're a beginner and you don't know anything about it. So, first thing I'm going to do is grab an image. This is a folder I have of two images here. I'm going to click and drag this cheetah into Photoshop, and I'll just leave it at that right now. I'm going to slide over this folder. Now, this is what you'll get when you first put it in here. If you any image you open up in Photoshop with Photoshop, it's going to be locked automatically, so you can't do much to it. But if you just click on this little icon right here in the layer thumbnail or layer palette, just click on this and it unlocks it. Now this is the layers palette. I should start with that. If you don't have this open, or if you accidentally close it, you can always find it within the menu here under Window and Layers, and its shortcut is F7. So you can just either click F7 or open it up underneath Windows. Alright, so I've unlocked it. Now I want to, well, before we go any further again, I'm going to go up to here to this little icon right up here. Open up this and go to panel options, and this allows you to adjust the size of the thumbnail within the layers palette. I always like to work to the largest so I can see the image more. You can just set it to whatever you want. Once that's done, you can say OK, and now I'm going to be covering all these little icons, well, most of them, today in this tutorial. So first, let's just start with this little icon right here. You can't do anything right now because Photoshop doesn't allow you to delete every single layer within your file. You always have to have one file, which is this one. So if I duplicate this, I can click and drag this down to the second icon, and that actually duplicates that layer. Now this icon is a create new layer icon. So if I don't drag anything down here, I can simply click this and it creates a blank layer with nothing in here. The checkerboard is the background of your actual canvas, and it always shows that it's blank and it doesn't have anything in it. Now to hide these, let's say you want to hide these cheetah images that you have, you can actually hover over top of this icon that's the eyeball and just select this and select this one, and it hides these layers. You can even hide a blank layer, but it's not going to do anything because there's nothing in that layer. And just to turn them back on, you can just click those little icons and they're back up. Now see how the trash can is visible now? It's because you have more than one layer here. So if I don't want this layer one, so I'm going to click and drag it into the trash can. Or if you don't want to click and drag, you can just hit delete on your keyboard and it will delete that layer. Now the trash can's gone because you only have one layer left. Alright, so next layer we have a create new layer. We also have the trash can. We can rename these to whatever you want. So you can double click in here in the text, and I can name this cheetah. And you can name this one, double click, empty. Alright, so the next little icon we have is a folder looking icon, and that is a group folder. And let's just click that once, and that creates a group folder for us. Now there's nothing in this group, but you can go ahead and put whatever you want. Let's just say I'm going to put the empty one in there. And now I have my empty folder inside of this group, and I can put the cheetah in here, and see how they go over to the right a little bit. That just shows that they're inside this group. So if I hide the group, it hides everything. See how these dim down a little bit? It's because they're in this group. Turn back on the group and you can see it. Now I don't want these in the group, so I'm gonna click and drag, and I don't want that group, and I'm gonna delete it. Alright, so that is just 3 tools that are they don't have much to them. So yeah, delete, create new layer, and a folder, and you can create those and they show up in here. They take stuff away. Now this is the this little icon right down here is the new fill or adjustments layer, and that has a lot to it. But if I select this, I can create a solid color, gradient, pattern, all these things. If I just click this once, it's going to create a new layer in here for me. So I'm going to just start with the solid color. And I'm going to pick my color in here by clicking and dragging. Or I can use a slider and change the color up. And just say OK when I'm happy with the color. Now the color is in here, as well as this little box right here, which is a layer mask. That is what this guy is. But when you create most of these things, if not all, they're going to show up with a layer mask, and we'll get the layer mask in a second. But this is just an easy way you can go through all of these, and it's going to create these things for you. I'm not going to get into all the details of the properties, but you can do this and delete anything you want and say OK, and just go through and see what each one of these do. I will get into the brightness and contrast one, but for right now I don't want to do the pattern, so I'm going to delete this one and delete the gradient, and just keep the solid color one and just name it purple, and keep it brightness contrast. Now if I can't see what it says there, I can just drag over the side here and drag this out. And now if you don't have the properties panel here and it's closed, same thing for when you can't see layers, you can go to Windows and go to Property, and it opens up this window here. And if I scroll through, like let's say brightness and contrast, if I click this, it's going to show the brightness and contrast settings within the properties panel. And so I can actually tweak this. I can brighten this up, and it's going to brighten up that purple color, but it's on its own layer. So I'm actually not affecting that purple color itself. So if I hide my brightness and contrast, it's going to show the existing purple color there. Turn it back on. I can tweak this, and I'm actually adjusting the purple color. If I wanted to do that, I can double click in here and go back and change my color and say OK. All right. Now the layer mask is cool, and we can just cover that because I'm not going to get into much of this in this tutorial. But you can go in here and select these, and it will create, like I said, new layers for you, and you can just double click on this or just click in here. You don't have to double click, and it shows it up in the properties, and you can start to play around with the settings just to see what it does. I'm not going to keep that one right now. I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard, and I'm going to use the layer mask. That's the next thing right here. That's the layer mask. The Cheetah doesn't have one. I can create a new layer mask by selecting the Cheetah and hitting the icon, and that matches with this one. I'm gonna go on to my, it's not purple anymore, so I'm gonna change it back to purple just for fun and repetition. Go back to purple. I'm gonna hide my brightness and contrast layer, and now instead of having my purple thumbnail selected, I want my layer mask selected. So I'm gonna click on this, and I'm just gonna use a simple brush right now. I'm going to have my brush on. Actually, I'm going to erase because I want to erase this purple. So I'm going to go to my eraser tool, and I want to make sure that I have my white background on, and just click and drag. And see how I'm erasing in here? It's going to show up. It showed up on my layer mask. Now, if I toggled my colors back and forth by hitting this little icon right here or hitting X on my keyboard, which I'll do, it toggles these colors. Now if black is visible, it's actually going to paint in with my eraser. Instead of using it as an eraser, it uses it as a paintbrush. So if I select my paintbrush, it's going to erase because black is on the foreground and white is in the background. Toggle this again, hit X on my keyboard. Now it paints in. Excuse me. So you can toggle back and forth, and you're always going to see a little icon thumbnail of what you're actually doing within your layer mask itself. Okay, so you can always play around with that however much you want, with like a new brush and new eraser, and have cool designs and patterns. But don't want to get caught up in that too much, because we want to get to layer styles, and that is right here. These are layer styles, but you can call them blending options. And I will hide my purple layer and just click on this. Actually, select my cheetah, and now click on this. And if I go to blending options, because I want to have more, I want to see all the options. I don't want to just click on one of them. I'm going to go to blending options, and that's going to pull up this little box right here. And you can select any of these that you want. You can turn them all on to see what they do, or you can just select a few. So I'm going to select a few. I'm going to select bevel and emboss, and let's say color overlay. Now, color overlay has a, if I select this, as that blending mode, and we're going to get to that right after this. But for now, I'm just going to mess with the bevel and emboss. You can play around with the settings in here, and there's a lot of settings. Don't get intimidated by them. I don't use these that much because a lot of people go crazy and use these as their art. So I just see it in a lot of different people's art where they put a picture and they put like a bevel on it, and they're just like, oh, look at this really cool thing I do. It's awesome when you're a beginner, so I'm not saying don't use them. Play around with them, see what they do, but you don't want that to be the thing that defines your art. And it's like, okay, the bevel is the coolest thing in the world, and check it out. But just see what they do and see how to improve on them within your artwork, and not make them your artwork, if that makes sense. All right, so these are all different things. I mean, they're self-explanatory pretty much. If I take off the bevel and emboss, I go to like an inner shadow. It's going to give me an inner shadow. It doesn't look like an inner shadow because of the settings, but I can play with the distance, the size. It's going to blur, and you can start to see the inner shadow here. You can play with the angle, and a lot of these have the same types of properties within them. So let's say like inner shadow, inner shadow, inner shadow, inner glow. So I'm going to turn the inner shadow off, play with inner glow, select in here. Actually, I think I'm going too fast. So if I select in here, I change the color, use this little slider, go to red, say okay, and there we go. So those are just kind of all the blending options that you can choose from. I'm going to say okay. And what's really cool about blending modes or blending options is that they all show up within here on your actual photo itself. So if I ever wanted to turn one of these off, let's say the inner glow, I can turn that off and have everything else be on. I can turn off all the effects and get back my cheetah, or I can turn it back on. Alright, so they're always going to be here, and you can collapse this. So if you don't see them and there's a little FX icon right here, that means you have blending options on this actual image. So you can just click this little trigger, or this little drop down menu button, and it's going to show you what you have on this specific image. Alright, so what brings us next to the blending modes, which are a really cool thing to do, or a really cool thing to use within Photoshop. So let's say, remember this color overlay? Well, first off, blending modes are up here in your layer palette, and they have all these different names for each one of these things. And what they do is, I'm going to drag in that little image I had before, and just click and drag this into my Photoshop file. Just press enter and say okay, and then it's going to set it up in here. It is a smart object, but I'm not going to cover that in this video. It's not going to affect you guys too much. But what I'm going to do is play with the blending modes. So I'm going to click up here, and instead of actually clicking each individual one, I'm just going to click in here once. And you see this blue box, it means it's highlighted. I'm going to use my arrow keys on my keyboard to start going down. And you see how this picture is changing. These are all the blending modes that you have at your disposal within Photoshop. And they're giving you really cool effects right off the bat just by switching up the blending mode and what it looks like, or what it is. So what is really neat about this is you can also tweak it within your blending options. And what I mean by that is I'll hide this guy right here, and I'm going to double click in here to open up my blending options again. And you see how the color overlay, see how it's a solid color blue. I want to mess with the blending mode, which it has, the color overlay has a blending mode within it. So if I click here, I'm not going to select individual ones. I'm just going to hit my keyboard arrow, down arrow, and it's going to start to change it. See? Really neat. Well, I thought it was really neat when I first found it. I was like, oh, this is amazing. And I was going all the way down, going all the way up just to see what they all do. And within your blending options, they all have this same blending mode. So if you have like a gradient has a blending mode. They also have an angle, what direction you want it. You have a scale, you have opacity, all that good stuff. So you can always play with the blending modes on each individual blending option. I'll say okay for that. Or you can play it with it here, and it affects the entire image itself. So if I turn back on this pug, it's affecting the entire image. And I can go and change this to whatever I want. And if you want to have, I'll go back to normal. One last thing, if you want to actually change just the opacity of this image, you can just go over here to opacity and move this slider up and down, or you can just type in a number that you want, double click in here, hit 50, say okay, and or you can just hit the by selecting this layer, you should be able to, oops, yeah, oh, nope. Well, let's just forget that, but let's just use the opacity right now and slide it up and down, and let's just say 72 is good. So by now we've covered the trash can. We created a new layer, which is right here. We renamed these by double clicking in here. We created a new folder. I can just create a new folder up in here again. To move these around to however you want, you just click and drag, and it moves it up and down in between these, in between the layers. If you want to select multiple layers all together, let's say you want to have all these inside of this folder, you can hold down the shift key, select on one at the top, hold down the shift key, select on the bottom, and it selects all of them. If you hold down the control key, it selects the individual layers that you want. Now I can move this in here, and now I can hide these layers, turn on all of them. I can hide individual ones or hide them all together, and just name this group whatevs. And yeah, you can collapse it, you can turn it back on, turn it back off. So yeah, that should get you started with using layers within Photoshop. If you're brand new to it, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, and I will be sure to answer them in a timely manner. All right, see you guys.